presentation. The same is true. Microphones, we do and your comments using the
We will now get started and we will hand over to our moderator, Mrs. Ina Harvey. Mrs. Harvey, the floor is yours.
Good morning and welcome to the webinar, SPS in a Changing World, Building Resilience in the Caribbean. I bring you greetings from ICA's Director General, Manuel Otero. My name is Ina Harvey and I'm the ICA representative in Barbados and moderator for today's session. Sanitary and phytosanitary or SPS measures protect human, animal and plant life and health. They support national and regional food safety, food and nutrition security, and agri-food export objectives. Within the past decade, market access for Caribbean agri-food products has become increasingly determined by compliance with international SPS measures. The recent COVID-19 pandemic has also brought SPS matters into the mainstream, highlighting an even greater need to strengthen SPS systems in the Caribbean. In order to remain competitive in the global marketplace, improving regional SPS public-private partnerships is critical in order to reduce trade time and costs. Caribbean countries must become more agile if they are to respond quickly and effectively to new international SPS requirements and champion post-pandemic economic recovery. This event will address issues impacting the global SPS space, implications for the Caribbean region, how to build resilient SPS systems, modernization of the regional SPS environment, and practical private sector experiences. The objectives of this webinar are to create greater awareness of the importance of SPS measures, build regional SPS capacity and know-how, and enhance regional SPS stakeholder relationships and networking. The event will commence by setting the global scene for the current SPS environment. Why is SPS important? What are the key issues impacting compliance? How to build resilient SPS systems in a changing world. The keynote speaker will also consider the recent COVID-19 pandemic and how it has transformed the international SPS space. More in-depth analysis will focus on SPS in the Caribbean region. What is the role of SPS in regional food security, the Caribbean's COVID-19 response, and SPS and the blue economy, global changes, and regional implications? Solutions for the Caribbean will also be highlighted. Participants will learn about initiatives to modernize the region's SPS framework and hear from two private sector beneficiaries about the practicalities of SPS compliance and the impact on their businesses. Finally, we consider how to prioritize regional SPS investments, the role of public-private sector partnerships, and the use of capacity evaluation tools as a course of action. It is my pleasure to now invite Dr. Gavin Peters, the CEO of the Caribbean Agricultural Health and Food Safety Agency, CAFSA, and Ana Marisa Cordero, acting head of our Agricultural Health and Food Safety Unit at ICA, to bring remarks on behalf of the respective hosts for this webinar. Dr. Peters, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mrs. Harvey, and welcome. Mrs. Ana Maria Cordero, acting head, Agricultural Health and Food Safety, Agricultural Health, Food Safety and Food Quality Program for the Inter-American Institute for Cooperation in Agriculture. Mrs. Gretchen Stanton, our keynote speaker, and my colleagues and other facilitators, Peter Murray, Juliette Goldsmith, Janet Lawrence, Ravi Sankar, Jason Arnold, Dr. Spencer Henson, special invited guests, and all those who are joining us today via the various platforms. Good morning, goedemorgen, bonjour, buenos dias. Welcome to CWA 2021, and greetings from the Caribbean Agricultural Health and Food Safety Agency, CAFSA. It gives me great pleasure to share these few words with you this morning. The theme for CWA 2021 is transforming our food systems. And for this webinar, SPS in a Changing World, Building Resilience in the Caribbean. There are some key phrases in those two themes. Food systems. Yesterday, we heard from the president of Guyana, where he spoke about what plans there are at a regional level and at the national level in Guyana to achieve that transformation of the food systems. There is resilience. What is resilience? We speak of resilience as a capacity to recover quickly from difficulties. Toughness, the ability to spring back into shape. The changing world. We cannot say that over the last 2 years our world has changed. We know about the impact of COVID-19 and what changes that would have brought to our region. And lastly, SPS. We hear this phrase or this acronym a lot, SPS, but do we really know what it means and how it impacts our lives? So in this webinar, this is what we are going to be focusing on. What has changed and what is changing in our world today? I'm sure you are aware. There are new and emerging diseases and spread of transboundary diseases. The pandemic, we are in the midst of it. We have lost a lot as a result of this. There's climate change. There's disruption in every aspect of our lives. Travel, the supply chains. So these changes exist. That's our reality. What do we do about them? Should we just throw up our hands and give up? I say no. These realities, or crises as some would say, creates opportunities. And the majority of our economies are tourist dependent. So with the pandemic, we have seen how vulnerable we are to the effects of such an event. However, we in this region, we have the resources, be it natural and human, and I dare say financial, to take advantage of this crisis by increasing our production of quality agricultural products. But how can we do that? It's not just increasing production. And I think on this webinar, you will hear and we will discuss together how this can be done by looking at topics such as building resilience. Ms. Harvey would have gone through the list of the topics that we'll be discussing. But building resilience in SPS systems, the role of SPS in our regional food security, the blue economy strengthening its SPS systems, capacity building case studies, and how do we prioritize our SPS investments to improve that market access? Because it should be told that there is much to be done, but we can't do it all at the same time. So we will have to prioritize. I promise you that this would be a very informative and exciting session, and hopefully extremely interactive. So let's all participate as we spend the next 2 hours together. I thank you for your attention. Thanks.
Now give the floor to Ana Marisa Cordero. We seem, however, to have a slight technical issue with the presentation in the CWA auditorium. Ana Marisa?
Thank you, Ina. Good morning. Hello, everyone. Dr. Gavin Peters, Chief Executive Officer from CAFSA. Gretchen Stanton, our keynote speaker today. Also, Peter Murray, Juliette Goldsmith, Janet Lawrence, Ravi Sankar, Jason Arnold, and Spencer Henson. Thank you so much for joining us today. And I just want to say that it's my pleasure to welcome you to this joint AICA and CAFSA webinar that is being hosted under the 11th European Development Fund Sanitary and Phytosanitary Measures Project, which is funded by the European Union. ICA has the privilege to be the executing agency of the 11th EDF SPS Measures Project, which seeks to increase compliance by CARIFORM states with international SPS measures, standards, and procedures to increase international and regional market access. The project has 3 components that focus on advancing the development of the SPS regulatory environment in CARIFORM countries, strengthening public and private sector capacity to comply with SPS measures, standards, and procedures, and strengthening SPS capacity in the fisheries sector. This last component is being implemented by our project partner, the Caribbean Regional Fisheries Mechanism. This project is being viewed as a critical for assisting with the transformation of SPS system in the region for improved production and trade. This event seeks to create an awareness of SPS issues and priorities and regional initiatives. We hope that the event will provide both public and private sector stakeholders with information to make informed SPS decisions for the transformation of our food sector in the Caribbean. Once again, welcome, and I wish you an informative session. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Ana Marisa Cordero, Head of the Ag Health and Food Safety Unit at ICA headquarters. And thank you also, Dr. Gavin Peters, our partner at CAFSA. We are experiencing a bit of a technical hitch at the moment with seeing the presenters on the auditorium screen on our virtual CWA website, and our organizers have asked us to hold just for a bit. They're fixing it urgently. As you know, this year is the first time that we are hosting Caribbean Week of Agriculture as a virtual forum because of the COVID pandemic. And we would like to ask you for your patience as we traverse this uncharted ground a little bit in hosting such a forum and in a virtual format. We understand that it's the 10X platform, so we have to wait for a few minutes. In the meantime, I'm going to introduce our featured speaker and await the screen working so that you will have the benefit of seeing her wonderful slides, which I would not want any of the participants to miss. So I'm going to introduce our featured speaker, Ms. Gretchen Stanton of the World Trade Organization, the Agriculture Division. Gretchen Stanton was formerly a senior counselor and the deputy director of the Agriculture Division of the World Trade Organization, WTO. From 1989 to 1995, she served as chairperson of the working group, negotiating the agreement on the application of sanitary and phytosanitary measures, the SPS agreement, and was secretary of the SPS committee of the WTO from 1995 until 2015. Ms. Stanton was head of the unit responsible for the implementation of the SPS agreement, including oversight of the Standards and Trade Development Facility, the STDF. She received a master's degree in agricultural economics from the University of Arizona, and she is a member of ICA's Hemispheric Program Advisory Committee. So in terms of SPS and this new normal that we have to live in, we have one of the best giving our keynote address. I'm going to see if we have the problem fixed and ask for a little patience on your end, if you would. So Gretchen, I don't want them not to benefit from your slides. Standing by. Thank you very much. Thanks everyone for your patience. I hope that you're enjoying CWA, which started yesterday with our opening ceremony and a number of technical webinars. And we also have a marketplace with a number of booths from the agencies, from our ministries of agriculture across the region, as well as from a number of businesses. Thus far, we have over 800 attendees at CWA this year. And now that we have a virtual platform, we have not only a Caribbean event, but a global event for CWA. So I see something happening. Good morning once more, and we are live. So without any further ado, I now ask our featured speaker, Ms. Gretchen Stanton, to give a feature address.
Thank you, Ms. Harvey, Dr. Peters, and my friend Anna Marisa for setting the stage and the kind introductions. And I want to thank all the organizers for inviting me to take part at this very impressive and important conference. But I have to give a particular shout out of thanks to Natalie Duki and the staff at ICA who have been helping with a number of minor technical issues. And I want to thank all of those who are taking the time to listen today and to participate in these events. I think it's quite clear from what Dr. Peters has already said, and actually the environment we are working in now during this conference, we are obviously in a changing world, and we need to know how to deal with that. If I could have the next slide, please. Thank you. There's a number of ways to define resilience. I would have to agree again with what Dr. Peters said. Basically, you want to be able to make sure you can continue to move forward, to do what has to be done in the face of crisis or challenges or threatening situations. And I think there are three critical elements for this: the leadership and culture of an organization or of an SPS system, the relationships within that system and outside of the system, and then a way to adapt to change. If I could have the next slide, please. We'll go through these. In order for an SPS system to be resilient, and in order for it to continue to adapt to change, it has to start with its leadership and creating a work culture. So those in charge, and I'll say at any level, because we do need those at the top, but you also need those who are in charge of smaller teams, those who are working with support staff at all levels. Those in charge have to be in a position to make necessary decisions in the face of crisis and threats. They'll need that authority. The next slide, please. In order for this to be effective, all the staff in the system really have to understand what their role is and how their work contributes to what has to be done by the organization. So unless you know how you fit into the picture, it's very difficult to make the necessary decisions and to make sure everyone is using the skills they have to resolve problems. Clearly, in order to move ahead in the face of challenges, you need very good teamwork. The next slide, please. You need staff that are willing and encouraged to share both the good news but also the bad news about what's working and what's not working. And to be on the lookout for any potential problems, for early warning signals of something not happening the way it should, of reactions of other trading members putting in restrictions that you might have to be ready to respond to. Everybody's got to be watching out for these issues, and they cannot do it unless they're working closely as a team. If I could have the next slide, please. So you want to encourage your staff to use all the knowledge they have in ways to solve problems. One of the advantages of working in an international environment, and I think all of you are likely to agree with me, is that you quickly realize that colleagues who come from different cultural backgrounds, different educational backgrounds and environments often think about problems in different ways. And if, as the head of a team, you put a question out there of how do we deal with this issue and avoid the temptation to give your own cultural centric view and approach and listen to others, you often discover that your colleagues have very, sometimes it seems unusual, very different ways of looking at a particular issue, and often extremely creative solutions that certainly I know would not have occurred to me at the time. So I think one has to encourage this among all members of the team at all levels if you want to find ways to deal with new problems. It's also interesting to note that what we have seen with the COVID situation and the crisis is a need for everyone to start to think of new ways to resolve problems and to question what they are already doing. Do we really need to require everything to be labeled in 3 languages when there is a shortage on the market and it's a critical product? And perhaps it's 2 languages or 1 are sufficient under the circumstances. So things like this we've been seeing happening already on the international scale, and I suspect also in your countries as well. If I could go to the next slide, please. But no single system has all the resources it needs and all the knowledge it needs in order to identify all the problems it might face. So we always have to be ready to work with others within your organization and others outside of the organization. When a crisis comes is not the time to start thinking about, well, wouldn't it be useful if we could speak with somebody at the university about this particular problem? Or wouldn't it be useful to find a contact in this trading country that might be able to explain or help or find a way for us to move forward? That should be done in advance as setting up a system that will be resilient. Identify what relationships are important, what resources you might need to get from others, and make sure that they're on board, that they know you may be contacting them should something come up, and be prepared to share and help others as well. The next slide, please. In times of crisis, it's critical to know where information is, and everyone needs to be able to access it. You cannot, and you'll have all lived with this, suddenly your staff is not in the office. The person who has prepared or has the files on their personal computer at home may not be available, able to share when you need that information. You need to have information stored where it is accessible to all those in the team. So when there is a crisis, whether it be a pandemic or a personal issue, death in a family, an ill child, you don't start from scratch. You have access to what has been prepared by colleagues so that someone else can step in and fill that role. I know in my work with the WTO, we worked always with a common drive, and all of our work, be it an early draft or a final document, was in a common drive. Everyone on the team could access this when they needed it. And when somebody was unavailable at the last minute, it was there. Someone else could pick up, continue, and work on that basis. So this is what you should prepare in advance, so it's on hand when the time comes and you need it. If I could go to the next slide, please. One of the basic internal problems to working as a team is that we tend to work with people in small groups or silos. Those that we have coffee with and chat with regularly may be very well aware of what is happening and the information and where to find it. Those who are not part of that small group or who have a different background, those who are veterinarians and not plant protection or vice versa, don't necessarily have or are not included in those often informal channels of communication. And if they don't have that same information, they cannot be in a position to work when you need them immediately in a time of crisis. So it's extremely important to make sure those communication barriers do not exist within your SPS systems at all levels. If I could have the next slide, please. Internal resources. I have never heard anyone tell me that they have sufficient resources, both human resources and financial, to do everything they would like to do. So you have to work with what you have, but you need to make sure that those resources can continue to work even at times of crisis. So you're going to have to be in a position to add some extra capacity when it is needed, but make sure the basic work continues to go forward. So we could go to the next slide. This is going to require that you create a system that is always ready to change. You need to know, or everyone needs to know, what the priorities are in a crisis. What are the critical elements that the SPS system must continue to ensure even while it's putting out fires somewhere else? What are those absolutely necessary inspection requirements or testing requirements, certification that allows the system to continue to function, whether it be during a pandemic, whether it be during a hurricane, weather-related crisis, or what other crisis may be there. And everyone, as part of the system, needs to understand this. If the office staff don't understand what is required or where things are kept, they cannot step in to help quickly when you need them. Everyone must be involved. I think the term that was used by Dr. Peters was to be agile. Agility is a critical element of being resilient. If we could go to the next slide, please. It's also critically important that you be prepared and proactive. I mentioned earlier that staff should be encouraged to share and to look for any possible early warning signals, indications that something is coming that could create a problem. And then you need your strategy and your actions to move forward before this has become a full-blown crisis. To what extent could you have done it during the beginning of COVID? Probably less, but as time has gone on, we have learned more. The warning signals have become stronger, and the ability to take action and the need to take action has become ever clearer. It could be the same case when you are dealing with weather-related crisis, when you are dealing with an outbreak of a particular pest or disease. You have to be watching for those early warning signals and ready to act as quickly as possible before the situation becomes extremely critical. If we could go to the next slide. So as you plan your strategies for the SPS system, you have to identify what are the vulnerabilities of your system. Where are the weakest points? Where do you have insufficient staff skills or knowledge? Where do you need to be ready to call on outside expertise? And put in place the plans and the strategies to deal with these. If we go to the next slide, it's extremely important also to simulate what you might have to do in different crisis situations. I hope this is a common practice in your SPS system. If not, it should be, to have simulations. Most of the ones that are done are looking at a particular disease outbreak, a particular pest outbreak, a discovery of some contamination in food. But I think the COVID situation has shown that perhaps we need to be thinking of other additional scenarios in which it's important to practice the responses, to review your plans, again, to ensure that all of the staff are well informed, well advised, they know their role, they know how important their function is, and they know what the priorities are to keep things moving ahead. If I go back to the next slide, please. This is just a reminder, there are many elements that are necessary to build this resilience, this capacity to make sure that even in the face of crisis and challenge, you can continue to have positive outcomes, you can continue to undertake the most critical core work, and yet at the same time, you are moving towards improving situations and facing new challenges. If I can go to the next slide, please. I think it's also very important to realize that we are not talking about an all or nothing situation. I don't believe there are any systems that are perfect in terms of their resilience. You can be a little resilient or a lot resilient. You can manage some situations well, but not others. This is something that is a process that has to be constantly revised. It has to be expanded. It has to be grown. One has to learn from the mistakes, what didn't work in this past situation, as to how to become more resilient in others. And challenges are always opportunities. The challenges now that you are facing in the Caribbean, particularly with the issues, and you saw them clearly regarding problems with tourism as the pandemic initially unfolded, was an opportunity, as Dr. Peters made very clear, to start building your own internal capacity and improving some of your own production. Use those opportunities. Take what you have learned over time and see how it can help avoid future crises And if you cannot avoid them, and we cannot always control those, know that you have put in place a system that will allow you to be more resilient tomorrow than you were today. I want to thank you for your attention, and I do look forward to the question and answer session and hope we have some nice interactive discussions. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Gretchen Stanton, for a thoughtful, pragmatic, and encouraging feature address. I think being a HACCP person, I think you took a HACCP approach where we now look at our entire system, our entire society, and do the risk analysis, do the hazard analysis. Look at the early warning signals. Look at our critical control points, our vulnerabilities, our weak links, do the simulations, bring our system back into steady state. And I'm really encouraged and inspired by what you have said, and I hope all of our participants are. This is a new normal for everyone, but I think we need to be gentle on ourselves as we relentlessly pursue all of the opportunities that COVID has brought to tighten up our systems and bring our region into SPS compliance. So thank you so much for a wonderful feature address. And we now move into phase 1 of our technical presentations. And I'm going to introduce our 3 speakers as a group and then one by one as they take the floor. Our first speaker is Dr. Gavin Peters, and he will speak on the role of SPS in regional food security. Dr. Gavin Peters took up the role of CEO of CAFSA, Caribbean Agricultural Health and Food Safety Agency, in April 2021, having previously served as an animal health specialist with the organization for 6 years. As a veterinarian, he graduated with a DVM from the Superior Institute for Agriculture in La Habana, Cuba, and completed an MSc in Agricultural Diversification, specializing in animal production. Dr. Peters has worked in 3 CARICOM member states and associate member states. His invaluable experience has been useful in his role at CAFSA in the area of agricultural health and food safety. Our second speaker will be Peter Murray, speaking on the blue economy, strengthening SPS systems. Mr. Murray is an advisor in fisheries management and development at the Caribbean Regional Fisheries Mechanism, or CRFM, Secretariat. He served as Program Manager, Fisheries Management and Development at the Secretariat of the CRFM from 2013 to 2019. Prior to that, he was a Senior Program Officer at the OECS Secretariat, now the OECS Commission. Today, he advises on and leads programs related to SPS matters at the CRFM. Mr. Murray holds a Master of Philosophy in Biology from the University of the West Indies and a Diploma in International Environmental Law from UNITAR. He was the driving force behind the development of the approved first iteration of the Eastern Caribbean Regional Ocean Policy and Action Plan. And our third speaker in this first section is Juliette Goldsmith, and she will speak on SPS in a changing world, implications for the Caribbean. Juliette Goldsmith is an entomologist and pest risk analyst with over 20 years experience in the agriculture sector. She is skilled in pest management, plant pest diagnostics, and pesticide life cycle management. At the Caribbean Agricultural Health and Food Safety Agency, where she is a plant health specialist, Ms. Goldsmith leads the coordination with the CARICOM member states and development partners in the updating and enacting of a modernized and harmonized plant health system and regulatory framework. She is also CAFSA's official contact point with the WTO SPS Committee. As the Executive Secretary of the Regional Plant Protection Organization, the RPPO, for the Caribbean, she coordinates regional phytosanitary activities. So I now call on Dr. Gavin Peters to present his paper on the role of SPS in regional food security. Dr. Peters, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Ms. Harvey. While I share my screen, I want to welcome those who have joined us or may have joined us after we would have started, and to indicate that this is an interactive session, so you can submit your questions via the chat available to you. My task this morning is to speak to you on the role of SPS in regional food security. As part of our team, SPS in a Changing World and Building Resilience in the Caribbean. When we speak of regional food security, I think the goal has always been, as in CARICOM, to look at how we ensure that we are producing the food or the required amount of food necessary for consumption by our population. And these goals or policies were implemented even going back to the revised Treaty of Chaguaramas. As part, as you will look at the community agricultural policy as described in that policy, in that treaty. You also have other initiatives such as the JAGBIO initiative, followed by the reduction of the community's food import bill, which is suggested at 25, that is 25% by 2025, using as the target that we in the Caribbean import almost $5 billion of food into our region. So the goal is to reduce that by 25% by 2025. A quick calculation would show you that that is $1.25 billion. So on an average, I like to break it down per year. That could be around $333 million. US dollars we are speaking about. And in responding to the situation, the COVID pandemic, our COVID task force was set up looking at our food security. That was at the beginning of 2020. And then in 2021, the heads of government, in their wisdom, have set up a ministerial task force on food production and food security, looking in a macro sense of the necessity for our region to become food secure. COVID-19 has shown us the importance of that. We need to, however, in striving for that goal of being food secure, produce quality products. I am saying that we have the natural, human, and financial resources that, if dedicated to the right programs, can lead us to achieving that food security. But I go back to, we need to be producing quality products. This is where SPS would come in. So I'm asking you, what does SPS mean to you? What is your understanding of the WTO SPS agreement? And what systems are in place, both at a regional and a national level, to ensure that we are meeting our obligations under the SPS agreement? And are we utilizing this agreement along the entire value chains to facilitate inter-regional trade? And if not, why not? These questions I'm asking because if we are going to become food secure, it is not just by increasing production, but I say we need to increase production of quality products so that we can then do the import substitution. If we don't, then we will still have problems that will be reflected in our health sector. And then it will be costing us more. So it is necessary that we look at how we increase the food production so that we can achieve our food security. That responsibility to ensure that SPS plays an active role or play the role that is necessary to achieve our food security falls to institutions such as, and are represented here today, at the regional and national level. CAFSA, our NAFSAs, or national coordinating committees. If we don't have these institutions, we need to look at how we build them or strengthen them. The CRFM, ECA, CARIVET, CPHD, and our soon to be formed Caribbean Task Force on Food Safety. How do we also ensure that these organizations carry out their tasks as it relates to the SPS agreement? We need to be committed. We need to collaborate among each other. We need to enhance our coordination, and we need to communicate, both at the regional level and at the member state level. We need to be assertive. We need to utilize the mandates, agreements that are there, and don't see the SPS agreement as a burden, but something that can be utilized for our benefit. Gretchen spoke about to build resilience, we need to be flexible, we need to be agile. So the SPS agreement speaks to, it's the application of sanitary and phytosanitary measures that are aimed at the protection of human, animal, and plant life or health from certain risks. So let's use it for our benefits and not, again, as a burden and something that we don't want to implement. There are measures, if we apply them correctly, can redound in benefits for all of us, for our region. Another way that the agencies that I spoke about are listed, how we can provide that information, can help to build or improve our food security, is to be helpful, to provide the information, produce the guidelines, and prepare tech packs, as I mentioned, for the value chains. The Ministerial Task Force has set out a set of produce that are for increasing the production. But again, we need to be able to produce these items in a manner that at the end, the quality will be similar, or we strive to get them to that level similar to what the international standard setting bodies, such as the OIE, IPPC, or Codex, would have outlined. And we need to assist with the development of our local SPS systems and bodies to meet our obligations in a timely and efficient manner. We need to faithfully execute these mandates, guided by the principles of the 3 standard setting bodies, as I would have mentioned earlier, and also guided by the tenants and utilize the principles contained in the WTO SPS agreement. And these are some of those examples. Transparency. We cannot hide behind implementation of measures that are not in congruence with the WTO SPS agreement. So we need to be transparent. We need to notify when we make changes in our measures, equivalence, risk analysis, and harmonization. These are some of the measures that we can apply, and if we do it correctly, enhance and build that resilience in our SPS systems, and thereby making us food secure. We need to promote food safety at every turn and in every instance. Produce and implement the applicable guidelines to produce safe, quality products if we are to be successful in reducing the food import bill. And here I'm having an emphasis on the residue levels, chemicals, and microbiological. In conclusion, what are we, or how are we going to utilize the SPS regime or agreement to enhance our food security? Enhance collaboration and coordination and communication with member states, our sister CARICOM institution, the private sector, which we will see some examples of that later on in the program, and other partners such as the FAO, ICA, and PAO. Provide targeted and focused information and tech packs, guidelines for improving the productivity and quality of the product that can substitute for imports. Execute the mandates guided by the principles of the Three Sisters. Promote food safety at every turn, and look at the impact that that can have on our trade, increased production, and food security. Together, we can achieve the goal of becoming a food secure region, and with prudent application of the SPS measures, have a significant impact on the role of getting us there. We can go far if we work together. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Gavin Peters, CEO of CAFSA, for again giving us practical, pragmatic guidance and advice on how we can make this region food secure and food safe. I now turn to our second presenter, Peter Murray, who will speak on the blue economy, strengthening SPS systems. Mr. Murray, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. While I endeavor to share my screen, let me bring greetings on behalf of the Honorable Sabato Caesar, Chairman of the CRFM Ministerial Council, Mr. Milton Horton, Executive Director of CRFM, Dr. Sandra Grant, the Deputy Executive Director of the CRFM, and just to thank everyone for having us involved in this particular activity. I am hoping you can see my screen. I'm presuming you can. Okay. The blue economy, what is the blue economy? Well, there are many different definitions of the blue economy. The World Bank sees it as sustainable use of the ocean resources. The European Commission has seen it as all the economic activities related to oceans and seas. The Center for the Blue Economy has seen it as including a wide range of economic sectors, and points to the fact that when we say blue economy, it really is referred to a number of different things with different meanings. Overall contribution to the economy is the need to address environmental and ecological sustainability. An ocean economy as a growth opportunity for developed or developing countries. The scope is fairly broad. One conceptual framework points to the fact that when we talk about the economic sectors, we talk about fisheries, aquaculture, tourism, shipping, biotechnologies, maritime security, mining, oil and gas, and renewable energy. But from our perspective, the perspective of my intervention here, we're looking at fish and seafood. And these products are among the most traded agricultural and food commodities, with more than 1/3 of their production entering international trade. It is felt that international trade in fish and fish products should not compromise the sustainable development of the fisheries. And so that's an important thing to bear in mind. The fishing industry as a whole, notwithstanding this impact it has on global trade, must be profitable in the long term. It must contribute meaningfully to the economies, hence the blue economy, if it detaches itself from short-term profit and pursues a sustainable strategy. So one view is that it is the consumer of fish and seafood products, as well as the retail sector, who actually decides the future of fishing. The consumers through responsible buying decisions, and the retail sector through responsible and sustainable seafood portfolios. The global demand for fish is expanding faster than global population. More than half of all fish production is now sourced from commercial farming, aquaculture, and mariculture. And the feeling is that these are thought to offer small states a substantial opportunity to sustainably expand their fisheries output while protecting the marine ecosystems, expanding employment, increasing food security, and linking these states to increasingly vertically and horizontally integrated regional and global fisheries-related value chain. But of course, there are a number of trade measures we need to consider. Fish trade measures adopted by states to protect human or animal life or health, the interests of consumers, the interests of the environment, and these should not be discriminatory. States have to adopt, it is felt, in the context of this blue economy, at a minimum agreed standards for fish safety and quality and trade of live fish, for example. The standard for fish handling practices varies among the CARIFORUM countries that currently, CARIFORUM meaning the CARICOM countries plus the DR, from products that are acceptable to international health and food safety standards to others that are not. But the continued viability of the sector faces several challenges, and some of these are related to the inadequate development of our SPS systems to suit the specific needs of fisheries and aquaculture operations. A high-level international meeting some years ago pointed to the fact that the growing demand for safe and nutritious food accessible to the entire population means that the inclusion of fisheries and aquaculture in national political agendas for food security. And very often this has not been happening. It is felt that it is imperative that markets eliminate obstacles and the technical barriers to trade in fishery products, which of course means a role that we have to play. In fact, the revised Treaty of Chaguaramas points to this in Article 57, the establishment of an effective regime for sanitary and phytosanitary measures, which means, of course, the harmonizations of laws and administrative practices in respect to SPS measures. The Caribbean Community Common Fisheries Policy in Article 18.1 directs us or mandates us, among other things, to look to harmonizing food quality assurance legislation, to harmonizing intra-regional SPS measures for fish and fishery products, to look at common marketing standards for fish and fishery and aquaculture products, and national common policies, measures, and standards. It means that building on market demand, of course, for sustainable seafood can actually create incentives for good practices. We feel that if we can build this market demand, people will start to do things the right way and move towards the type of practices that we feel can help make this an important part of what we call the blue economy, driving new investment opportunities related to sustainably managed fisheries and aquaculture. One of the things we know is that buyer demand for sustainable seafood in Europe and North America, our major markets, has driven substantial changes in the large fisheries that supply these markets. And the feel is that there's opportunity for in developing world fisheries like ours to use this market demand to also drive a shift towards the best practices, reducing the risk, whether real or perceived, of investing in fisheries and aquaculture. So sustainable fisheries can be an essential component of prosperous blue economy. Globally, 270 billion annually US to global GDP. In order to optimize the returns in our region from fish catches and to contribute to the contribution of the blue economy, improvements have been identified, Some of them have already been put in place in terms of manuals and so coming out of the 10th EDF SPS project. And these improvements we see are critical if our states are to expand regional and international trade related to fisheries and aquaculture. Of course, we know that some of the important countries have established some stringent rules, which actually can be seen as inhibiting the expansion of trade in fish and fishery products. And application of some of these conditions has resulted for us in loss of access to international markets for fishery products on account of the lack of capacity in some instances, and translate into a loss of export earnings, decreased food security, and negative impact on rural stability. But maybe lights at the end of the tunnel. The 10th EDF SPS project did seek to support the beneficial integration of our states into the world economy by facilitating entry and improved market access. It aimed to strengthen the capacity of our states in critical areas with regard to institutional and technical support. A proposed regional SPS framework was developed for fish and fishery product, and tied to that was the concept of development of model legislation and protocols and guidelines for health and food safety related to fisheries and aquaculture in the region. Coming out of that 10th EDF project, a number of draft model laws for member states were developed based on what was then the CARICOM Model Food Safety Bill draft and the draft ICA CARICOM Animal Health Bill. But these are currently being revisited. The Office of the General Counsel of CARICOM has been looking at these with us and with the stakeholders, taking those three things that have been developed under the 10th EDF project and bringing them up to scratch, up to the day, as it were, by way of a draft model Animal Aquatic Health Act and draft model food safety regulation. So it's being revisited currently. But we also have looked at, in the previous project, protocols on good fish and fishery product hygiene practices, and these are important. A number of protocols were conceptualized, and a number of these were selected and actually documented, excuse me, in a compendium. And some manuals were developed in the 10th EDF SPS project as well, in terms of moving us forward, looking at how we can do things better in terms of driving what we've been talking about. The 11th EDF project, Sanitary and Phytosanitary Measures project, seeks now to increase compliance with our states with international SPS measures. We hope that this will be achieved by building on the advances made in the implementation of the 10th EDF project. And in terms of the fisheries sector, the action focuses on the development of the regulatory environment in our states, strengthening the public and private sector capacity to comply, and overall strengthening SPS capacity in the sector. In terms of that latter part, we've been looking at strengthening the regional coordination framework. Remember, I spoke about the 10th EDF project had conducted assessments and developed a proposal on strengthening regional SPS monitoring programs, essentially a green paper for a Caribbean regional fisheries SPS framework. And this framework was seen as providing guidance on the development of regional cooperation mechanism to support standards. Well, the 11th EDF project that we're now involved in, through it, a plan is developed for the implementation of the appropriate mechanisms, not just having this general framework, but let's make it a roadmap. Let's move it along and see what are the do's and what do we actually need to do moving along to implement this framework. And as part of this, so far, we've had a review of stakeholder linkages to identify the roles in fisheries and aquaculture and determine the overall position in the coordinating mechanism. And it's hoped that a plan will be discussed with stakeholders and refined based on the feedback received. So essentially, this roadmap further defined, clearly defining the priorities regarding how to deal with the main weaknesses, which we have found according to the guidelines that defines the Codex guidelines defining the minimum SPS requirements, as well as, of course, determine a time frame. This roadmap hopefully will not just say what exactly we need to do to bring this framework into fruition, but what is the time frame for the defined actions, hopefully including synchronization of regional procedures and inspection procedures and harmonization of official monitoring and surveillance. And we see that in an 8-stage process that is actually ongoing. We're also looking at building food safety capacity for the fisheries sector, essentially under the 11th EDF project, promulgating the guidelines developed under the 10th project. A review had been done under that 10th project, and we've actually gone through what came out of that and have chosen 3 countries to participate in an activity where we provide technical assistance. I'm sad to say one of these has since dropped out, but the technical assistance by way of training and guidance to implement the protocol is being provided. In fact, some training of trainers activities have actually already been completed in Suriname, for example, and the trainers are being expected to deliver capacity building of 130 of their workers. The training materials have been translated into Haitian Creole and Spanish. We had first thought, since it's Suriname, English and Dutch, but the reality on the ground, if we have to get everybody on board, and I'm reminded of Dr. Peters' earlier intervention, and also the future keynote presentation, bringing everybody on board means ensuring that they can be a part of it. So looking at Haitian Creole and Spanish as well, because a lot of the workers in that plant are there, and we included PowerPoint presentations and videos and interactive content. Of course, also looked at inconsistencies currently of the HACCP plan that had been previously approved, and working with in consultation with the competent authority in the country, look to getting changes to implement, to improve the HACCP plan. The other private sector entity, we had a new complete documented system for standard operating procedures and traceability and HACCP-based controls. A small, relatively small company in Guyana, and they're now ready to roll out a series of training and feedback sessions. From both of these technical assistance activities, we're hoping to produce a number of products that can be used to guide, educational materials to use to guide others who want to come on board, and a mini documentary which will be used in the capacity building sessions. And of course, 1/3 part of this fisheries component of the 11th EDF SPS project is technical assistance to improve laboratory testing capacities. Very often, the laboratory services are not adequate, and there are challenges to our countries for achieving certification of products. Studies conducted at the 10th EDF project had focused in part on determining the status of a capacity. A further survey under this project will be conducted to determine the advancements that need to be made. And laboratories from 2 countries selected based on the 10th EDF review will receive technical assistance to improve their capacities for monitoring and testing, determining, among other things, the equipment that they need to bring them that next step closer to where they need to be. And equipment will be provided based, of course, limited by the budget to the extent they can be done, to support them in meeting the testing requirements, excuse me, with the appropriate training and technical guidance. We've been looking now at a GEF project called Promoting National Blue Economy Priorities through Marine Spatial Planning and Caribbean Large Marine Ecosystem Plus, BECLB Plus project, we call it. And it's going through its approval process now. But coming out of that, we also see that one of the important components is inclusive sustainable fisheries value chains, which means strengthening the seafood value chains, supporting the realization of these blue economy opportunities and the sustainable development goals. And among the outputs would be assessing seafood value chains and ensuring they're incorporated into national blue economy strategies, adding value, seeing what are the added value opportunities that can be there, and market and economic feasibility being assessed, including the testing of innovative post-harvest processing methods and reduction of post-harvest loss. Looking at national policy recommendations to promote the enabling environment for strengthening the seafood value chains and market. Very importantly, including the empowerment of women, indigenous peoples, and other minorities, including youth, I dare say. Because in some instances, we started to look at youth as almost a minority. And regional and national fisheries authorities and other relevant regulatory agencies being trained in seafood value chain analysis and development within the context of the blue economy. So with all of these, Having put the earlier perspective on the blue economy, having looked at what we have been doing and looking to do, introducing the contribution of fisheries to the blue economy can take place when returns from fish catches are optimized. This requires improvements to post-harvest handling, processing, quality control, marketing and of the fish and other seafood products, allowing them to find their place in the global fish trade market by expanding the regional and international trade for these products, fish and aquaculture products, in markets, Europe, USA, Latin America, and I dare say, we must also consider our own regional markets. What we do to improve for extra-regional standards redounds to the benefit of our own people. So we must also bear that in mind. So between the 10th and the 11th EDF project and the BECLMA project, we feel that they have contributed and can continue to contribute to the efforts by strengthening the coordination, by building food safety capacities, by improving the testing facilities. And this can help to make the fishing industry more profitable in the long term and thus contribute meaningfully to the blue economy. We think that it's now up to the region to implement the outputs of these initiatives and without realizing, following on the steps of Dr. Peters, an ending catchphrase to take the next steps. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you very much, Peter. I like the pun catchphrase related to your fish.
Can't help it, can't help it.
I think another excellent presentation. When you look at the totality of what the Caribbean is, yes, we're small islands, we have some mainland states, but when you put our land space together with our oceans, we have a huge resource that we really need to take advantage of through all of this emphasis on the blue economy. And one thing that COVID has shown us is that we have to work together as a region. So in terms of the theme of this CWA, transforming our food systems, fish and seafood have always been a very important part of the diet of the Caribbean people and what tourists expect when they come to the region, seafood and fish in their menus. So this emphasis on what is happening and what is being led by the CRFM, it's very, very important and very exciting. So Peter, thanks for your passion. Thanks for all that the CRFM is doing. And thanks again for an excellent presentation. We now come to the third speaker, Juliette Goldsmith, who will speak on SPS in a changing world, implications for the Caribbean. The floor is yours, Ms. Goldsmith.
Thank you, Mrs. Harvey, and good day, everyone. Just let me share my screen. Just a second. Yeah. Sure. All right, and I will just take off my video for a bit to preserve the bandwidth. So yeah, again, welcome everyone, and thank you so much for joining. I will be looking for a bit on SPS in a changing world, the implications for the Caribbean. That sounds like a very broad title, but specifically, the content will include a brief introduction, looking at SPS in a changing climate, and very, very briefly, the SPS in a global pandemic and a short conclusion. Yeah, so the world is changing, and it's changing fast. Somewhere between 53 and 55 AD, the Apostle Paul, in writing to the people of Corinth, said, the scene of this world is changing. I know I'm not going to preach a sermon, but it's just to put into perspective that the world has been changing like forever. And it is no secret that it is changing now and quite rapidly. We have heard it said so many times, change is inevitable or change is the only constant. So we need to adjust or to adapt to changes. But in order to do that, we need to understand how changes impact our world, our work. Then we can adjust to mitigate the negative impacts and to take advantage of the opportunities. And Gretchen, in her keynote address, mentioned opportunities as it relates to challenges. And so I will just be looking at, as I said before in my introductory slide, SPS and climate change. That is where my emphasis will be, but very briefly to mention the COVID-19 pandemic. Climate change is real. It is ongoing and it is accelerating. In the public debate, the effects on SPS issues get much less attention than, say, melting icebergs, because they're much more complex and less intuitive. Many factors affect the emergence and spread of pests and diseases, and there is considerable uncertainty surrounding the individual factors involved and the relationships between them. However, the overall direction of change is quite clear. Rising temperatures and changing precipitation patterns will increase the frequency and magnitude of extreme weather events into the Caribbean region. Human health and agricultural productivity will be affected, in part through changing pressures related to food safety, animal diseases, and plant pests. Again, into the Caribbean region, we understand both of those quite well. Specifically related to plant pests and diseases, plant and animal health problems already represent severe constraints to agricultural productivity within the region, and climate change is expected to increase pest and disease pressure. New areas will likely be open for colonization with this change in temperature, change in precipitation patterns. And plant pests and animal diseases may establish a lot more rapidly than other organisms, giving them a head start and increase the tendency for them to dominate in affected areas, with implications for us in the Caribbean and our much valued biodiversity. A change in climate may thus lead to the abolition of carefully and quite expensively established and maintained pest or disease-free areas. As it relates to food safety risk, a study by the FAO some time ago revealed that the incidence of foodborne diseases such as salmonellosis and cholera increased with rising temperature. And also food safety may also be compromised by zoonotic diseases, like COVID-19, or the disease that caused the pathogen that caused COVID-19, which may be transferred to humans. Such diseases may affect food safety and animal health if climate change influences the transmission cycle and increases the prevalence of vectors and animal reservoirs. And then there is trade. Trade presents both opportunities and challenges in terms of the likely increase in SPS risks caused by climate change. Some areas may see increased production due to extended growing seasons, while areas with an already warm or dry climate may face declining yields. And this will alter the location of food surplus, and the deficit regions will have to be supplied through trade. Therefore, trade will be an important instrument to counteract negative effects on food security, including in developing countries like ours. But there's a but. International trade of agricultural commodities may in itself function as a pathway for the movement and spread of pests, diseases, and food safety risks to new areas. And for us in the Caribbean, where it is already warm, I think there is the fear that organisms that are adapted to our conditions may move to temperate regions when it gets warmer. And also there is the fear that our, limited, sometimes ineffective SPS systems may facilitate this movement. And so it is likely that for us in the region that we will see more stringent SPS measures being applied to our exports. And so, what can we do? An effective policy response will be crucial to counter the expected negative impacts of climate change on our SPS issues. But this has to be accompanied by improved capacity of the institutions responsible for the implementation. And these include having robust surveillance and monitoring systems, investing in our diagnostic capacity, increasing our risk assessment activities, and discussion on risk assessment and the implications of climate change could be a presentation in itself. But this is an area of weakness within our region, and one I think that we really have to look at going forward. I say very briefly on COVID-19. The COVID-19 pandemic itself has brought matters related to SPS measures into the mainstream. Although always there and always important, it has highlighted the importance of the measures that protect human, animal, and plant life and health, and the extent to which these overlap. During the 2019 to 2020 period, in response to COVID-19, there were a number of notifications from WTO members regarding SPS measures. And these include some trade restrictive measures, such as import or export restrictions, additional SPS measures being applied, undue delays due to lack of expedited procedures. We understand that there were restrictions caused by the pandemic, but these, in my estimation, are temporary. They are not expected to last. On the other hand, there were some trade facilitated measures that I do believe will stay with us going forward. And these include acceptance of electronic certificates, digitalization and simplification of import, export, and transit procedures, having mutual recognition agreements, inspection cooperation schemes that were developed to or agreed to help to avoid duplication, the use of cooperation agreements and guidelines, and general greater information trading among trading partners. And so in conclusion, just to say again that, yeah, the world is changing and it is changing fast. Climate change itself is accelerating, contributing to increased and new risks of concern for food safety, animal health, and plant health. Trade will be an important instrument to counteract these negative effects on food security, but may function as a pathway for the movement and spread of pest diseases and food safety risks to new areas. Mitigation itself will necessitate having effective policy responses accompanied by improved capacity of our national SPS authorities. Yeah, the world is changing, and as a region, we need to adjust and adapt to mitigate the negative effects while taking advantage of the opportunities that have been provided. Thank you so very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Ms. Goldsmith, for your presentation. Throughout all of our presentations this morning, we heard change, we heard the need for inclusivity, for public-private sector partnerships, for thinking out of the box, and for being prepared so that we can manage all of the changes that are coming our way in this new normal in which we're operating. We now go into a question and answer session. We have already two questions, one for our featured speaker, Gretchen Stanton, and the question for Gretchen is, how do we really manage this change with persons who have very fixed ideas, fixed habits within our SPS management system? So Gretchen, maybe you can answer that question for us.
Thank you, Ina. I think Well, we're all human. This is where all systems have their strengths and their weaknesses. We have to deal with each other, with people with different perceptions, different concerns. Sometimes their ego gets in the way of moving ahead on some issues. But I think I'll go back to what I'd said before. Challenges are opportunities. And I think with this COVID, so many people who were complacent, set in their ways, suddenly realized that they had to change. There has to be some modification. The way things were being done doesn't work in the current environment, may not work in some future environments. So I think what you need to do is work with those by showing them how the benefits of what is being proposed, the benefits of the changes being suggested. As noted here by Ms. Goldsmith, COVID has brought SPS measures into public awareness, into political awareness. So this is the time to take advantage of that awareness, that attention that's being given to say, oh, this is what the problems are from the system as we have had it. This is how we could do better, be more resilient, be more flexible, move into the situations that we've agreed we want to approach, taking advantage of this attention that has now been given to it. I think that the best way to deal with people who are fixed in their ways is to convince them that change is necessary. There are better ways, and make clear your arguments as to why and how this needs to happen. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gretchen. We have a question for Dr. Gavin Peters. What do you see as the main SPS challenge to food and nutrition security? Dr. Peters?
Thank you, Ms. Harvey. The main challenge, as I see it, the main SPS challenge to food and nutrition security, as I see it, has to do with how do we certify that the food that we are producing meets those necessary standards that are required, that are set for all of us to follow. And I think it is not just about producing a lot of food, because we can do that. But if we are not following the guidelines that are set out by these standard setting bodies, it is going to be a challenge, because we would be consuming products that are not necessarily meeting those standards. So that is what I would say is our main challenge, SPS challenge, to ensuring we have safe and secure food for the population to consume.
Thank you very much, Dr. Peters. I have my own question. Peter, of course, Peter.
My hand is up. May I make hot pursuit on Dr.
Absolutely,
Peters?
absolutely.
We maritime people
ahead.
like to see things in terms of surveillance and control, so we talk about hot
All right.
pursuit.
All right.
I think the point, I'm agreeing with Dr. Peters, but there's a perspective that I want to add to the mix. If you consider the nature of our fisheries sector, for example, and that much of our fish production comes from artisanal and or small scale fisheries, the challenge of being able to ensure along that chain, for example, some of the standards that the EU sets, where you have to ensure that the fish is caught in a certain way and handled in a certain way on board a 24-foot pirogue. Come on. So notwithstanding that I agree that that is probably the most significant challenge, we must recognize the challenge of dealing with that challenge in the context of some of the sectors that we're talking about. In our fisheries sector, reality is that up to about landing, it's kind of hard to be able to have that assurance that Dr. Peters has spoken about. From landing, when you start to go through the marketing process, you can do that. And I think Mr. Arnold was give an example of how that's been done here in Belize. But prior to that, from catching the fish to getting it on land, you have a challenge there, and we must be mindful of that, such that the systems we develop take that into consideration and do not make that inability, quote unquote, be a deterrent to us carrying it forward. Just thought I would add that in here. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your addition, Peter. Very, very valuable. I just wanted to add the dimension of food fraud. In these days of fake news and the trade of all sorts of products, I would like to say that food fraud is assuming more and more importance in the Caribbean region, and for products that we are focusing on, products like honey, seafood products especially. And in addition to SPS compliance, we need to really start to think about putting systems in place to manage food fraud issues. Just want to put it on the table. Dr. Peters, your hand is up, and then Peter.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Ms. Harvey. And yes, I fully agree with my colleague Peter in highlighting that challenge that exists when you have these small operators going out to catch, but it remains a challenge, and we still need to recognize it. And at the national and regional levels, you so eloquently said, we need to put the systems in place that, having recognized that these are the challenges, how do we address them? So that at the end, the product that, or the produce that we have to be sold or on the market is of quality. Because if not, then those challenges, if not addressed, would present instances of problems for the consuming public, where we can end up with having other effects on our health, which will have, as I mentioned before, effects on our health budget. So we have to look along the entire chain where those challenges arise. And I fully agree and support with you. From the fishery sector, that is a real challenge, but let's work together to ensure that we are addressing those challenges. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Peters, for that contribution. Peter, you have...
yes, my hand up. You challenged me to speak. You mentioned food. You mentioned food fraud. Yes, food fraud. And it's important because we had a ministerial meeting on IU fishing and transnational organized crime. And one of the aspects of transnational organized crime that was actually mentioned is food fraud. Food fraud is not just an issue in terms of meeting standards for trade in fish, but it has linkages to criminal elements. And so in taking that on board, I think Gretchen, if I may call you Gretchen, she made the connection earlier about the linkages that we have to make among different things that may not seem to be strictly related to this in the pure sense, but we have to take them on board. So when we're talking, for example, SPS, when we're talking about these standards, we are also talking about paying attention to some criminal aspects that are occurring, such as food fraud. I just thought I would make that link back, because we have a tendency to be in our own little kingdoms, fiefdoms or silos, choose the one you prefer. And we don't see those linkages and those connections. And I'm a firm believer that we get nowhere fast if all we do is stay in our little kingdom, fiefdom or whatever. So absolutely. I just wanted to bring that into it. Thank you very much for bearing with me.
Fully agree, Peter. And that segues into another question for Gretchen. Gretchen, what do you see as the role of the private sector in building resilience?
Well, it's the private sector that's on the front line. They are the ones who are producing the products. They're the ones who are processing, the products. They're the ones who are finding the markets and selling the products or buying if they're the importers. So they have to be a part of the whole system. The system cannot be imposed only from the governmental perspective, because you're not the ones producing the products to start with. If you wish to meet the SPS standards, if you wish to have adaptable systems, you need also adaptable production systems, and that requires that the private sector be part of your discussions. If you need to move to, if adapting means also being able to put in substitutions. This is the way we normally produce this. We cannot get that product at this time. We're going to have to use something different. You need to make sure it's meeting requirements, but then you need the private sector adaptability and involvement in making sure you've got that resilience. And they are also your ears on the ground. They're often the first ones to realize that something is coming, some change is happening, that there is a problem with a different demand from a market, there's a problem getting products and supply. So they may see the crisis coming before your SPS officials and competent authorities see that crisis coming. And they need to be able to be part of the system so that they can provide that information, bring that alert, and have it taken seriously when they do. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'd like to thank all of the speakers as well as our featured speaker for an excellent session thus far. I'm going to close this Q&A session. We have another one coming up. I don't see any more questions or comments either in this chat or on the CWA auditorium. So I'm going to move into our second session. And again, I'm going to introduce all of the speakers together and then one by one as they present. Our first speaker will be Dr. Juliette Lawrence, who will speak on modernizing the Caribbean SPS environment. Dr. Lawrence is an entomologist and agricultural research and development professional with over 20 years of technical and administrative experience in the agricultural sector in the Caribbean. Dr. Lawrence has a PhD in entomology and nematology, and she's a certified project management professional. Over the years, she has managed a wide range of projects funded by donors, such as the European Union, the United States Department of Agriculture, USDA, the United States Agency for International Development, USAID, and the Common Fund for Commodities, CFC. Our second speaker comes from the private sector, Ravi Sankar, a friend from long ago. Hi, Ravi. And he will speak on SPS capacity building, giving a private sector case study for the condiments and spices sector. Ravi Sankar is the owner and managing director of Rhs Marketing Limited. He is an award-winning regional industry leader in food and beverage processing with 25 years experience. Mr. Sankar is a brand innovator and a product developer for his own Caribbean flavors, that's spelled with a K, Rajapuri and Kitch Mix brands created for local, regional, and international markets. Our next speaker from the private sector on fish and fishery products is Jason Arnold, who is the Quality Control Manager at National Fishermen Producers Cooperative Society Limited in Belize. Mr. Arnold has held this position for more than 12 years. He's HACCP certified, his company is HACCP certified, and he is in food handling and processing. And Mr. Arnold is also a member of the Belize Fishery Improvement Project. Our next speaker, Dr. Spencer Henson, will speak on prioritizing SPS investments to improve market access. Dr. Henson is a professor in the Department of Food, Agricultural and Resource Economics at the University of Guelph, Canada, my old alma mater. Welcome, Dr. Henson. He's an economist who has worked for many years on the socioeconomic impacts of food safety and quality regulations and standards. He has undertaken research in over 60 countries, including the Caribbean. His work has included the development of the PIMA framework for prioritizing trade-related SPS capacity building in collaboration with the Standards and Trade Development Facility. So without any further ado, I now invite our first speaker, Dr. Janet Lawrence, to speak on modernizing the Caribbean SPS environment. Dr. Lawrence, the floor is yours. I think you're muted.
I think I'm good now. Thank you very much, Mrs. Harvey, moderator extraordinaire. Thank you and welcome, and good morning to colleagues on the Zoom platform, as well as those on the 10X platform. We're delighted that you have taken the time to join us. And it really is my pleasure to speak very briefly on modernizing the SPS environment in the Caribbean. What I'm going to do is just speak a few seconds on the importance of modernizing, and then let us look critically of where are we in the region and what are some of the initiatives that are ongoing to assist with the modernization, and then some final statements. So it is known generally that countries that build resilient SPS systems are really optimally positioned to meet their food and nutrition security goals, comply with trade requirements, market requirements, I should say, and protect the environment. And this is especially true for a changing world, which we are experiencing in all its glory now. And so in order for us to build a resilient system in the region, we must continue to invest. And over the years, we have had several investments to strengthen SPS systems. And I want to bring to your attention a study that was conducted under the 10th EDF SPS project, which assessed the cost benefit of compliance versus non-compliance of SPS measures by CARIFORUM countries. And basically what the study showed was that for every dollar spent, there was a $3 benefit derived from the investments. So the benefits clearly outweighed the investment. Other benefits that the study highlighted was improved public health, improved animal health and plant health, sustained protection of national agriculture. And Dr. Peters would have highlighted the necessity for that to meet food and nutrition security goals. And of course, protection of our ecosystems, which is so very critical because many of us as countries, we rely on tourism as our economic base. And so protecting the ecology of the countries, of our countries, is very important. But in order for us to realize these benefits of investing for modernization, we must take a very systematic and strategic approach to determine our areas of vulnerabilities and identify the most suitable actions for us as a region to build SPS systems. And so let's take a look and see where are we. What I want to do is just to give you a snapshot on the status. And this snapshot is based on 2 surveys that were conducted. One in 2020, which looked at the status of agricultural health and food safety systems in the public sector. The second one I want to highlight is a survey that was conducted in 2021, which focused on looking at food safety management systems in the private sector along 3 target value chains that are very important to us as a region: roots and tubers, herbs and spices, and coconut. And these 3 value chains are important for us, not just for food and nutrition security, but also for trade and also for poverty alleviation. What I will also do is look at a few initiatives. In the interest of time, I will focus on some regional initiatives that are specifically targeting the modernization of the SPS system. And so we're looking at 2 projects being funded by the European Union under the 11th EDF, which is the SPS Measures Project, which is being executed by ECO, the Coconut Development Project, which is executed by CARDI and the ITC, the Greater Caribbean Safeguarding Initiative, supported by the USDA APHIS PPQ, and implemented by the CPHD, which is the Caribbean Plant Health Directors Forum, as well as its partners, and also a laboratory strengthening project that is being coordinated by CAFSA and funded by the IAEA. I acknowledge, of course, that there is significant investments going on at the country level, also under the EDF through the standby facility that is being managed by the Caribbean Development Bank, and also the Technical Barriers for Trade project, which is being executed by CrossQ. So in terms of the public sector, as the arm of the SPS system that looks at in development and enforcement, and what I want to do is look a little bit, where are we in the regulatory environment? The regulatory environment is what cements the system. And so let's look at policy, legislation, and coordination. And then where are we with respect to human resource capacity? So if we look at our policy framework as it relates to agricultural health and food safety systems, which then, of course, is underpin the SPS regime, we know that it's fundamental for us to have a strong policy framework for strategic, coordinated, and a focused approach in terms of how we do business. And what we're seeing at the regional level, we do not have an agricultural health and food safety policy. And at the national level, only 50% of our countries either 50% of countries either have a policy or they have a policy in progress. So let me rephrase that. We have 4 countries with policies and 3 countries working to get a policy in place. And the other countries, we have nothing so far. And so with the recognition that we need to have a strengthened public sector control systems and the implementation of these systems by agribusiness operators that is supported by policy measures. Currently, we are in the process of finalizing a regional agricultural health and food safety policy, but not just a policy, an action plan, so that it can be implemented and monitored over the next 3 years so that we can see tangible changes and benefits. And in addition, to support countries and national agricultural health and food safety policy framework that countries can now utilize to upgrade their policy measures, implement their policy measures. And this is very, very key and a very, very positive aspect of us moving forward with modernization of the system. This is led by CAFSA. In relation to the legislation, where are we? We have countries, we have legislation across the region ranging from 3 years to 35 years. And we have countries assiduously working to upgrade their bills and regulations. We have about 50% of countries that in the last 5 years have updated their bills, which is excellent. And in addition, 30% continue to work on their regulations. Countries continue to indicate that they are experiencing constraints because of outdated legislation with respect to the ability to enforce as well as to meet trade requirements. So under the 10th EDF, a series of regional model bills were developed in the areas of animal health, plant health, and food safety. And these bills have been endorsed and are now official CARICOM bills, and we are seeing that countries are utilizing these bills, which is excellent because the model bills provide us with tools that contribute to the harmonization of the SPS legislation in the region with that of international standards. And so this is something that is very significant for us. In addition, we have great buy-in on the ground, in that we have our public sector senior technical experts agreeing that to use these model bills is going to be very critical in terms of bringing the reform that is needed to the legislative framework at the national level. And so we, as we know, legislative reform takes time, but we are making significant progress. And within the next 5 to 10 years, we should be advancing. Of course, as we have trade requirements that change, we will have to be, this is going to be a dynamic process in terms of, continually strengthening some of these bills and regulations. We spoke this morning about the importance of collaboration, cooperation, and communication, coordinating better across the SPS regime. And this is an area that we have been working on in terms of assisting countries to be able to come together and work more in terms of a team and a collaborative approach to sort of reduce information gaps, reduce duplication, and of course, to address SPS issues in a more cost-effective manner. So if we look at exactly where are we, at the regional level, coordination is relatively very strong. We have CAFSA at the core of coordinating the SPS regime at the regional level. And we also have a series of technical regional entities that provide support to countries in a very systematic and coordinated way to build their capacity in the areas of plant health, animal health, and pesticide use and management. So we have the Caribbean Plant Health Directors Forum, we have the Caribbean Animal Health Network, CARIVET, and we have the coordinating group of pesticide control boards for the Caribbean. And these technical groups work very closely with CAFSA. And I was very pleased to hear Dr. Peters indicating that in the pipeline, and what will be on the table very soon, is a technical group that will deal with food safety matters. And I think this is very significant as we advance. When we look at the national level in terms of coordination, we're seeing that 50% of countries have a coordination mechanism which varies from having an established agency responsible for HFS, straight down to having an ad hoc committee responsible or facilitating improved SPS controls. With the knowledge that we need to continue to invest and strengthen coordination for all the benefits that have been highlighted, especially through our keynote address, what has been happening is that mechanisms have been developed which seek to promote an integrated and a comprehensive approach to coordination at the national level. And what we have been able to do is to develop these mechanisms that are specific to the nuances of countries, and this has happened in 10 countries. And now towards implementing these mechanisms, what is being done is that we are looking at building the capacity of public sector in leadership and management skills, which is very, very important for us to have the type of coordination that we need, especially in this time. And what the course looks at are very significant elements in terms of change management, decision-making, communication, strategic planning, negotiation, and team building. So we have 50 persons registered for the course. The course is ongoing. And a unique aspect of the course is that we will have participants will have the opportunity, I should say, to develop their own personal development plans as it relates to leadership and management, and have the counsel of our expert facilitators to guide them in terms of the plan that they would commit to be rolled out over the next 3 to 5 years. Having a strong system requires us to have a cadre of well-trained technical personnel and, of course, infrastructure to support it. And so if we look at some of the critical areas that are needed to effectively provide SPS services to countries in terms of surveillance and monitoring, diagnostics and testing, risk analysis, emergency response, inspection and certification, and quarantine, and look exactly where we are with respect to the human capacity. With respect to plant health, we are seeing that more than 50% of countries are indicating that they have adequate human resources in the majority of the areas. However, what stands out for us is diagnostic and testing capacity, where 100% of countries indicated that their human resource capacity is inadequate. If we look at the animal health, if we look towards animal health and we look at where are we with respect to human resource capacity, we see that in most of the areas, there is a need, especially in the areas of risk analysis and emergency response. We're seeing the needs in terms of human resource capacity being greatest in food safety, much higher than that of plant health and animal health, with risk analysis jumping out as a very critical area. And these are very significant because we would have seen that Mrs. Goldsmith would have highlighted the need to have skill sets built in risk as we move ahead in terms of identifying vulnerabilities and identifying where we need to put our resources. In terms of what is happening to sort of fill some of these gaps, for plant health, we have a very focused approach in terms of where we have investments along the entire chain or the key elements that I would have highlighted. We are seeing about 50% of the areas of need in animal health being addressed. And in food safety, we are also seeing some interventions, but this definitely is an area that we need to build our cadre of professionals. We have CARFA that does an excellent job in terms of surveillance and monitoring of foodborne diseases. And also I wanted to highlight to you a very important addition to the food safety landscape of the region, and that is the rollout of the ISO 22000 certification by the National Certification Body of Jamaica. And as you know, this ISO 22000 speaks to food safety management systems. And this is a very, very critical and important addition to the landscape in the region. With respect to testing capacity, there are several initiatives being rolled out with respect to laboratories, providing laboratories with assistance to be able to come to conduct tests required for market access. And what is also important is that as we upgrade laboratories across the region, and this has been done in the past and we continue to do so, we need to rationalize our resources so that we optimize the delivery of services. And this is especially true because we're in an environment of scarce resources. If we switch to now take a quick look at the private sector, which of course underpins because they implement SPS standards to meet their market requirements, be it local, regional, or international. And as I said, we did a snapshot in terms of SMEs along 3 main value chains. And if we look at what are the main constraints impacting these SMEs in their current export market, we will see insufficient resources in terms of money, time, and human capacity. But if we take a quick look at some of the factors or constraints that are SPS related, we see the legal and regulatory framework and the inability to access appropriate testing laboratories as being constraints. So these things will be addressed based on the initiatives I would have highlighted before, so that as we move forward, we should be able to have a legal and regulatory environment that will facilitate trade, production and trade by the private sector. As it relates to food safety management systems and the priority needs of the private sector, number one was really access to finance to make the changes to comply with international standards. We also saw that personnel trained in food safety, information, equipment, and physical infrastructure are issues that need to be dealt with. So currently, we continue as development partners to roll out technical assistance programs directly for private sector in terms of providing training and technical guidance to improve their capacity to implement food safety management systems at an international level. Also to provide general training to strengthen in key technical areas of traceability, HACCP, gap auditing, GMPs, just to name a few. In the pipeline, what there is a project which is also now seeking to pilot a food safety information platform, which targets micro and small enterprises. And this will provide basic information for operations of this size, as well as learning opportunities on the principles and practice of food safety. And this is something that will be rolled out at the end of the year that we hope that persons will take advantage of. We must remember that we have the Caribbean Export Development Agency, which is which targets the private sector and which is an important asset for us in this region as it relates to trade, investment, and promotion. So in wrapping up, we have made significant strides towards modernizing our SPS systems. But as we are moving in a world that is changing constantly, it is going to be very important for us that as we invest in making the required changes to build resilience in the system, that we look at how do we apportion, I should say, our investments. In the cost-benefit analysis study I would have referenced earlier, the study indicated that we should look at a split of 55% of investments towards public goods and services and 45% towards the private sector. And one of the things that we have to look at, because once again, I have to repeat that we are in an environment of scarce resources, we have to make decisions that will optimize our development impacts. And therefore, we have to look at making our decisions based on data. And what we also need to have is that we need to have tools that will allow us to make objective decisions to prioritize our areas of investment. And so it is hoped that if we utilize a very strategic and systematic approach that is inclusive, that we will realize our food and nutrition security goals, that we will be able to capitalize on much more market opportunities, especially those that are under the economic partnership that we can benefit from, I should say, under the economic partnership agreement. And also look at an approach that will allow us to contribute as a sector much more to the economic development of the region. So ladies and gentlemen, I thank you for your time and your attention. And so back over to you, Mrs. Harvey.
Thank you so much, Dr. Lawrence, for a comprehensive presentation on how we build that infrastructure of policies and regulations and legislation and people, our resources, in order to make our system work. I think sometimes many of us attending from the general public and from other institutions are not aware of all that is going on in the background, all of the funding being provided by many donors within this environment that is going towards creating that impact and that very strategic focused impact to make our SPS system more robust and valid and workable for our private sector especially. And I'm going to move into our private sector presentations. The first one, case study on condiments and spices from Ravi Sankar of Trinidad and Tobago. Ravi, the floor is yours. I think you might need to unmute.
Okay, sorry. Good morning again from the team at Rhs Marketing. So I'm just gonna give you a little overview on Rhs, what we do. So as you see, Rhs Marketing is a leading food and beverage manufacturer, more agro-based products based in Trinidad and Tobago. We have been in operation for over 25 years, manufacturing a wide range of sauces, wet seasonings, spice blends, flavorings, chutneys, drink concentrates. These products are available locally and exported to 27 markets regionally and internationally. More recently, we have started producing rum-based beverages, ready to drink for the bars and stores. Rhs Global Inc. is our distribution company, which was recently established in Florida to take care of our US distribution through Amazon, eBay, and those economic e-platforms. Next. Under the Rhs Marketing umbrella, we have many brands that we produce: Caribbean Flavors, Herrera's, Rajapuri, Kitch Mix. We are also contract manufacturers for leading brands that are locally based, regionally, and internationally. SPS in a changing world. Essential businesses were allowed to operate during the COVID-19 pandemic, food and beverage, and many of those that were deemed essential. In our operation, we had to adhere to a lot of the COVID-19 protocols, operating with staff, 50% of our staff, following all COVID-19 protocols, training staff regularly to ensure that they understand the importance of following all protocols, reorganizing the work environment to maintain social distancing, etc. Plant sanitization. This was very important for us, regularly sanitizing work areas, temperature checks, persons entering the compound, and so on. Next. We see the following business opportunities during the COVID-19 pandemic. As this came about, we weren't sure what was going to happen. However, the e-commerce sales, many customers turned to e-commerce platforms to purchase products, especially on Amazon. Amazon sales went through the roof. Supermarket sales increased as consumers are cooking more at home. So you had a lot more people at home cooking and trying different recipes. Export sales increased as demand increased. Our customers, export customers, were asking for products, as same were happening everywhere. People at home and looking for ingredients. In this case, we had to scale up our production and mechanize some of the processes to be able to supply. With all of this happening at the same time, we took advantage of the social media platforms to increase our brand awareness. So via Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, we use different tactics to push the brand and to get more brand awareness. Thanks. So we did face a lot of challenges. during this period. Although we were still very busy, shipping costs went up, getting containers out of the port, where you had even the customs were running on probably 50% or less employees. The ports were running slower. We faced all these challenges to clear our raw materials and so on, and securing supplies of raw materials and packaging. So you found that a lot of people could not supply us on time for some of the raw materials that we required. Adherence to COVID-19 protocols. It was a challenge with staff to keep them aware of the situation and to remind them to wear their masks, to keep sanitizing, to keep 6 feet apart. So it was constant training and supervision over the staff. We implemented a shift system, new working hours, in order to minimize the amount of staff in the factory and still get production output that was required for our demands. Next. Standards. So as a food and beverage manufacturer, keeping a clean and sanitary work environment was not new for us, as much as it's very important. We have been following GMPs since our inception and since we started in food processing. We have been preparing for FSSC, the Food Safety System Certification, before the COVID-19 pandemic. This certification is recognized worldwide and gives us the opportunity to export to any market and be accepted everywhere. FSSC covers all aspects of food safety from farm to fork. This is recognized by many government agencies, regulating bodies, and makes the clearing process easier. This certification gives the customers confidence in the products. Next. FSSC requires us to demonstrate to our customers our ability to control food safety hazards in order to ensure that food is safe at the time of consumption, and we will therefore implement systems that consistently provide safe products. I know earlier on we spoke a lot about food safety, so this is very important for us. This includes working with our suppliers of raw materials, ingredients, manufacturing processes, our maintenance contractors, local and export customers, and our employees involved in all these aspects of our operations. This meant assembling a quality team, hiring additional staff in quality control, all guided by a consultant, and also implementing a food safety policy, which is our first goal, to implement a safety policy. I know we spoke about policies before too, so this is very important for us. Intensive training by a consultant, we started that, although trying to combat the COVID-19, we had to find the space and the time to fit in all the training that was required. We extended our lab, purchased more testing equipment, and infrastructural work was done to create better workflow. New machinery, we added new machinery, as I said before, to scale up our production to meet our demands. And next. Benefits of implementing the FSSC standards. Customer satisfaction, which is number one, delivering high quality products which meet or exceed consumer expectations and are safe for human consumption. Actually, ever since I started exporting, the US has been actually preaching food safety standards and food safety. So we have been trying to meet those expectations by the US FDA. Then profitability, we are able to grow a market grow market share in an efficient, food safe, and cost-effective manner. This helps a lot. And once we have those systems in place, we are much more efficient. Training and staff performance, we training staff, developing our employees in productive and safe work environment with continuing assessment of their performance. Continual improvement, it keeps us on abreast of everything, where we must keep improving our production and whatnot, our factory, to continually evaluate our operations for improvement of our overall performance and to ensure quality and safety in our products. We pushed the Fssc certification. Prior to this, we were going to get our HACCP certification. However, Fssc was required by, I would say, for a co-packer, a multinational who we are packing for right now. And they've been asking, we should get the Fssc certification, which is much more recognized. And so that's where we really started putting this in place. This will, of course, well, it's still costing money in excess of 150,000 US. And I guess every day we see things changing and we have to keep implementing and training and so on. So it is an investment, I should say. Again, it's for the brands, for the company, and again, for the staff, everybody involved. So next, that's my presentation. In a nutshell, I know we have time. The time is limited. It's a lot we can speak about. But I want to say thank you, and I'm open for questions, if any.
Thank you very much, Ravi Sankar of Rhs Marketing. I must say that RHS and Ravi are COVID champions. We had the pleasure of having him at a business forum that we managed with the COLI ACP out of Europe at our very first one. And we were very pleased to hear of all of the innovations and of all of the work being done despite COVID, that he found space and time to invest. And I love what he said, growing market share in an efficient, food safe, and cost-effective manner. This is what the private sector has to do. They are in business, they've made investments, and they need to stay in business despite all the challenges. So thanks again, Ravi. Our next speaker is Jason Arnold, and he's going to tell us his case study on fish and fishery products from Belize. Welcome. You have the floor, Mr. Arnold.
Thank you, Ms. Harvey. Yeah, to start with, I will just give a oversight of our employee of National Fishermen Producer Society Limited. National Fishermen Producer Society Limited was registered in 1967. We have a membership of 441 producing fishermen and 77 non-producing. These members are also the owner of the assets and owners and represented by a board of directors, which is elected by the members. Next slide. The members produce about 240,000 pounds of lobster tails, 350,000 pounds of conch, and a varied amount of other marine products. The production of lobster is closed. The production of lobster is closed on February the 28th to July 1st, and conch from July 1st to September 30th. Our market clean conchs must weigh 3 ounces for it to pass and meet the standard, while lobster tail must be 4.2 ounces. Significant production occurs about 2 weeks after each season begins and fluctuates as the season progresses due to weather condition and availability of fish species. However, it must be noted that lobster and conch production is steadily decreasing due to unsustainable fishing practices and trend likely to continue. Next slide. The documentation and implementation of the HACCP-based quality assurance system for NFC started in 1997. This program is a continuous program that changed the infrastructure and management of the cooperative to a degree of excellence. In 1997, through the management committee and membership support, we invested close to $400,000 in the plant infrastructure and layout. Changes that took place includes construction of dry storage area, worker changing room, reconstruction of refrigeration rooms, and movements of business offices on second floor, and general renovation to the plant structure. Today, the plant stands as it had never been in several years ago. The plant now meets HACCP principle and standards as a food processing institution. Next slide. Additionally, continuous training programs for fishermen and plant employees are held just before the beginning of each season, lobster and conch. The training includes HACCP principle, food hygiene, and good manufacturing practices, and standard sanitation operating procedures. Development and implementation of HACCP plans and other good manufacturing practices has become a routine since the last 5 decades. Plant management focuses more on quality and safety of food rather than production. This concept is particularly visible in the investment in equipment and personnel to aid in the plant's development. Random product testing and inspection has become part of the norm in the system. NSC is committed in all aspects of the organization to provide local and international seafood consumers with safe and quality product. For this to be possible, NFC has implemented a HACCP system for product safety and quality. The system consists with the society goals for continuous improvement and customers' satisfaction. We also have a traceability system in place, and this system is used electronically so that we can trace all marine products from harvest to shipping. Next slide. NFC uses the Belize Agricultural Health Authority, BAHA, which is our competent authority here in Belize, for food microbiological testing program to test its finished product. The 6 finished products are raw frozen conch, raw frozen tail, raw frozen lobster head meat, raw frozen fish fillet, raw frozen whole greens lobster, and raw frozen, and frozen whole cooked lobster fall under this program for microbiological testing. Next slide. The cleaning and sanitation program for our staff encourage a clean as you go policy. Any spillage are clean up immediately. Food contact equipment and utensils, trough, knives, spades, buckets, baskets to transfer product are washed and sanitized at the beginning and the end of each processing day by production staff. The same employees, they are the one who actually do the cleaning after production and first thing in the morning before we start. Due to COVID-19, we also have to implement a lot of new standards, sanitize hands before entering the plant, temperature checks. And we also have instead of visitors come and visit the office upstairs, we have one designated station for anyone who come and visit, unless they have like maybe a meeting or a appointment, then they are allowed to enter inside the building, otherwise from the employees. That's about it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Arnold. I must extend my congratulations. I'm so proud of what your cooperative is doing and that we have a world-class plant here in the Caribbean, in Belize, and that you are focused on continuous improvement. I had to look up what lobster greens.
Yeah, the lobster greens is the lobster greens is what we classify. We just classify it as lobster greens, whole greens, because it's the whole lobster, but it's not cooked, it's raw.
All right, okay.
They put and the antennas and everything.
Well,
and the whole cook is the same whole lobster, but it's just cooked.
Well, I learned something today. Thank you so much for your presentation. And I now turn to our next speaker in this session, and he is Dr. Spencer Henson, and he's going to talk about prioritizing SPS investments to improve market access. Dr. Spencer Henson, the floor is yours.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. So what I am going to very briefly talk to you about is, I think, one of the huge challenges in the whole SPS arena. And this is not a challenge that's unique to the SPS area, and that is setting priorities from a very large list of potential areas of investment. I'm going to talk to you a bit about the SPS environment as a sort of reminder of where we are, and in many ways the enormity of the challenge. I think talk about the related challenge for capacity building and for setting priorities, and then to give you an example of a framework that has been developed and can be used to establish priorities in the trade-related SPS capacity building arena. Next slide, please. So first of all, the SPS environment, and I could have highlighted all sorts of issues here to lay out the enormity of the challenge associated with SPS issues. Also, how we've come a long way in knowing what the challenges are, how enormous, how large they are, and how they're evolving, but that we still have a significant distance to travel. For many countries, I use the analogy of swimming against the tide of increasing and evolving SPS requirements. And up against that, often very significant resource constraints that limit the speed of travel of countries within both the public and private sectors. Next slide, please. One thing I think it's important to recognize, and often we forget this, and that is just how significant the evolution of official SPS measures has been over time. Now, luckily, because of the SPS agreement, we now have a way of seeing and of monitoring the evolution of official SPS measures through the official notifications. But this chart here just shows you, since the initial days of the SPS agreement, just how significant the growth has been in official SPS measures. Next slide. But at the same time, and this is very interesting, because at the time that the SPS agreement came into being, these were really very much in their infancy and not really on the radar screen. And that is private standards, particularly for food safety measures, that have become very much part of the world in which we live today in terms of the management of SPS measures. Next slide. And this shows you, for example, the number of producers globally certified to the global GAP standard for good agricultural practice. And you can see this incredible growth in numbers of producers that are certified to this particular standard. Next slide. And so we've had this significant and very rapid growth in the landscape of SPS requirements that trading nations have to comply with. That is, nations and the private sector exporters within those nations that are actually making efforts to reach export markets and comply with the SPS requirements of those markets. And at the same time, next slide, we've had a lot of efforts to assess the capacity of countries against global benchmarks in all sorts of areas. So we have the IPPC's framework, the PCE framework, that allows us to evaluate national phytosanitary capacity. We have the equivalent for animal health capacity. And we have the more recent tool of FAO to allow us to look at food safety and other elements of food control capacity. And these have been a very effective and a very important set of tools to allow us to see what are the weaknesses in capacity in countries. But unfortunately, what they do is lead to a veritable very long shopping list of capacity building needs. So I think we're in a world where we can see that the SPS arena, the requirements with which countries, with which exporters are having to comply, is evolving rapidly and has evolved rapidly over time. And at the same time, very significant gaps in capacity. And so we have this divide that countries are progressively trying to bridge, to reduce in terms of prevailing capacity and capacity building needs. Next slide, please. And the challenge for so many countries, for all countries, is to build capacity in a way that uses limited resources efficiently and effectively, that leads to enhanced trade performance in a world where we now recognize that compliance with SPS requirements is one of the biggest challenges and one of the biggest factors influencing trade performance when it comes to agri-food products. But then at the same time, recognizing that the whole point of all of this, in terms of enhancing trade performance, in terms of enhancing our ability to meet SPS requirements in the context of trade is to have socioeconomic impacts domestically. So reducing poverty, recognizing and reducing gender gaps, enhancing sustainability of agri-food systems, and we talked about climate change, etc. And dealing with simultaneously with all of these issues, building capacity in a way that simultaneously uses resources well, enhances trade performance, and has significant and positive socioeconomic impacts is extremely challenging in terms of trade-offs where SPS requirements and SPS capacity building may have different impacts on these different parts of the triangle. In assessing these impacts in a consistent way, in gathering the required data, and in doing the necessary analysis. So all of this, I think, is a capacity challenge in itself. Next slide. Now, I've been involved in the development of what is called the Pima Framework, and some of you here have been engaging with me on the Pima Framework. The Pima Framework, which was developed for the Standards and Trade Development Facility, is a framework that aims to address the capacity building challenges that I just spoke about. And I put it forward to you as an example, as an attempt to develop a framework that facilitates more effective priority setting, more effective capacity building decision making. It is not perfect. It itself is challenging in its operation. But what it aims to do is to provide a structured approach to establishing priorities. So prioritizing that capacity building shopping list that so many countries face, to do it in a way that is accountable and transparent, and to do it in a way that facilitates inputs to the whole exercise by diverse stakeholders. So in many ways, what it does is it tries to build into and take account of many of the issues that Gretchen spoke about at the start, about some of the big themes that we've been talking about collaboration and communication and inclusivity. So it's a framework that aims to facilitate that process. And in so doing, bring about greater resource efficiency, so better use of limited resources, to ensure that capacity building is demand driven. That is, it looks at what do we need to do first, and to enhance the trade and socioeconomic impacts of capacity building, recognizing that we need SPS capacity for a reason. It's the SPS capacity building is not the end. It is actually the end or the means to an end, which is better trade performance, better socioeconomic impacts. Next slide. Now, the way the Pima framework works is essentially by saying, let's lay out what are the things that we want to do. That is, what are our capacity building needs? So what it does is say, okay, let's explicitly lay out that, you know, all of the things we need to do, all the plant health, the animal health, the food safety things that we need to do, the enhancements in capacity that we need to achieve, and we lay them out here as option 1, option 2, option 3, option 4, option 5, and so on. And then when we've laid out all the things that we potentially need to invest in, we say, okay, how are we going to decide which of these is top priority and next priority and third priority and so on? So how are we going to actually distinguish between them and say, these are the ones we need to do first? They're all important, they're all critical to us, all worth doing, but what are the ones we need to do first? And the way we do that is to say, well, what are the criteria we're going to use? Let's be explicit. Let's lay out the criteria that we feel we need to use that are appropriate for us. And in here, it could be the cost. Generally, we want to minimize how much it costs us. We want to maximize the trade impact. Maybe we want to have an impact in terms of the safety of the domestic food supply. Maybe we want to have an impact on poverty. Whatever those things are, we lay out the criteria explicitly and say, we're going to use these criteria to prioritize all our capacity building needs. And we're going to recognize that we don't necessarily weight all these criteria equally. So we're explicit and say, okay, maybe impact on health and impact on exports is most important. Cost and poverty are important, but not so important. And we're going to lay explicitly out the weights that we're going to apply. And then what we do is we gather data for all of this. We fill in the spreadsheet. And then on the basis of this, we derive our rankings. Now, this aims to mimic how a lot of us make our decisions actually on a daily basis and how a lot of institutions make decisions. It's just that so often they are not open and transparent and explicit in using a framework like this. Next slide. The Pima framework itself goes through a whole series of stages, engages with stakeholders, defines all of the elements of this spreadsheet or this framework that I've just laid out, and derives quantitative priorities that are then relayed back to stakeholders for validation. Next slide, please. So for example, I mean, this framework has been applied now in 20+ countries, including in Belize and the Bahamas, in the Caribbean. And essentially you end up with a prioritization of the different capacity building needs with a score out of potential 100. And it allows us to see, of all of these things that we would like to do, which of them we think should be done first on the basis of the criteria we have defined, the weights we've defined, and so on. Next slide. Well, finally, what have been the experiences with this framework? This framework is not the panacea. It aims to be a structured, useful way forward. What we have seen in where it has been applied is that it is very effective at setting priorities where we have a number of things we want to take into account in setting those priorities, i.e. we have multiple criteria, and where we have imperfect information. It's actually very effective at helping to set priorities within that context. And as I said, we've applied it now in 20+ countries. So we now have a pretty good idea of where it works well, where it doesn't work as well, and the challenges in itself in applying the framework. Now, it's important to recognize that applying a framework like this is a capacity challenge in itself. It's a steep learning curve applying an approach like this, in gathering the data, in thinking through how we set priorities, how we set the criteria, how we gather the required data. And we have a whole training program, which some of our colleagues here have recently concluded, associated with using the framework. The final thing I think it's important to recognize is we have this idea that transparency, structured, accountable priority setting is the way to go. This is a good thing. And by and large, it is. It tends to, everything else being equal, lead to better decisions, more accountable decisions. But let's be honest, transparency is not welcome by all. Transparency is about evening the playing field in terms of power. Often it is lack of transparency that is the whole basis of the power that many people have. And so a framework like this, yes, I think gives a very structured, very transparent approach, but it also challenges established norms of the way in which decisions are being made. People have to be open to this. They have to be accepting of this and recognize that the outcomes may be very different to the way in which decisions have been made in the past. Okay, I'm going to leave it there. If anyone has any questions, then I'll be happy to address them. Thanks so much.
Thanks so much, Dr. Spencer Henson, for a thought-provoking presentation about transparency, resource learning curves with applying frameworks such as this. And again, the challenge that came up in a question earlier, how do we address fixed ways of thinking and fixed ways of doing things? We are in an environment of shifting goalposts. And I want to introduce also that the Caribbean is the most vulnerable region when it comes to tourism. Our tourism product has been affected in the 90% because of COVID, and our tourists are looking for traceable, safe, healthy, nutritious food, farm to fork, farm to table, boat to throat experiences, authenticity. They want to assuage their social conscience, their environmental conscience, and having a robust SPS environment, and one that has taken into account the priorities and the strategic priorities, and one that is transparent and traceable and everything, are all part of this SPS environment in this changing world. We have one question from Mr. Arnold. We're going into the Q&A now. A question from Mr. Arnold on the traceability system that the cooperative has incorporated. Why now and why there? Mr. Arnold, can you answer?
Yes, the traceability system was implemented like about 2 years now. And what happened is we have our fisheries department, and the thing is, behind the fisheries department, they are trying to make sure our registered fishermen are doing sustainable fishing. And by doing that, they get all records from us, from that NFC, regarding where the fishermen do their catch, how much pounds for every species lobster and conch. And what happened is they install a tracker on each vessel. So we have access to that tracker to know that where each fisherman are fishing. We have a map from the fisheries department that has 8 different areas where in the sea where the fishermen are registered to. And that way we know exactly that if you are from area 1, we will know because we know the name of the vessel, we know everything. So that way, when the fishermen make their delivery, okay, this is boat, the name of the boat, Mayele. Okay, Mayele is only can fish in area 1. So we know all this product that they are actually giving us, are delivering us to our port is from area 1. And we will patch that off. And when we do we put that in the system, and with the pounds, the name of the fishermen, how much pounds they bring in, and everything. And all that information goes from the receiving. And from the receiving, we will have it in storage until the day when we process it. We will have all that information. And whilst the processing is going, if we put that amount of batch to process today, that batch will automatically delete out of the receiving and goes into another process to finishing to shipping. And when the fisheries department asks the cook how much poundage are harvested from area 1, how much pounds are harvested from area 2, then we have that electronically. We could send them by email automatically. We don't have to go through a lot of records and paperwork and everything, so we could give them that information right off the bat. And we are also using the system to try and meet new customers and so forth, so that we have, you know, the customers, they prefer, they love to know more information about what they are getting. So the traceability system is here to help us a lot. I also include some of the quality asset records on the system, so that we could even have that backup on the, and we have that backup on the, what do you call it, the internet.
The cloud.
Yeah, on the cloud, something like the cloud, yeah. So we could never last those information using that system. Rather than paperwork, you can't, after among the decades, those papers are partly, you can't read anything off that. So we have it like that, how the system is set up now. The only, and then we get the approval from our competent authority, BAHA, if we can do all our records electronically. Right? So, but it helped out the fisheries department mostly for the, as well for the sustainability.
That's so excellent and impressive, Mr. Arnold. And you said you had 518 fishermen. Cooperative is such a bad word around the region, and this is such a wonderful success story and best practice model for cooperatives in the agri-food sector in the region. So again, receive my congratulations. I am most impressed.
And the thing is behind it too, just for we have two cooperatives. We have two cooperatives here in Belize City, and the other cooperative, they have like about 500 members as well.
Wow, I hope, but would be interesting. I don't want to prolong the question or the issue, but it would be interesting to see how many women and youth are involved and to look at that gender aspect of your cooperatives. I have a question for Ravi Sankar about the 150,000 invested. Over what time period was this investment made, Ravi? Are you unmuted?
Yeah. It over a 3-year period.
Okay.
Because everything is being done in stages as we make the changes in the infrastructural changes, getting all the paperwork done, and then the audits would come. Everything included in that.
Okay.
So it's over a period of time.
Thank you, Ravi. And the question for Spencer, you talked about the Pima framework. What time frame is required to implement this framework?
That's a very, let me put my video on. That's a very good question. It depends. It can be done extremely quickly. We have concluded it in the matter of 2 to 3 weeks in some countries. But realistically, it takes 3 to 4 months, I would say. That I mean, it depends on a lot, and a lot of that is about engagement with stakeholders and the gathering of data. So, you know, it's how quickly you are able to bring stakeholders together, how responsive they are to providing the information you need to populate all those different decision criteria that you might define. But that sort of time frame is really quite doable. And even actually in the context of COVID. So we applied this framework in the Bahamas in the context of COVID. And this was the first time that it had been done within that context, because previously when we had applied the framework, it had always been through face-to-face stakeholder consultations, workshops, etc. And in the COVID context, that couldn't happen, and so we had to reinvent the way in which it was actually done using remote surveys, etc. And it worked actually very effectively. Yeah. And the interesting thing you mentioned about tourism is that when we applied it in the Bahamas, whereas normally the framework has been used to prioritize trade-related SPS capacity building needs, in the Bahamas, we included SPS capacity building needs for the tourist sector, for example. So it was expanded out.
Dr. Henson, Dr. Peters is asking, can you expound a little more on the data, the importance of data in the application of the framework?
Yes, I mean, the whole point of the Pima framework, and not everyone is comfortable with this, okay? Particularly technical SPS experts. That's my experience, because if you are trained, you know, in a laboratory-based discipline, for example, then you are trained in the precision of measurement, okay? The reality is that when you get into the realm of the social sciences and you get into the realm of measuring socioeconomic impacts, it's often very difficult to measure that precisely. We have imperfect data. It may be very difficult to predict the impact on trade, on poverty, on employment, on women's livelihoods, etc. And so we are forced to think about what are the most plausible scenarios in terms of impact, and to use those when assessing the costs and the impacts of capacity building needs. And of course, in many countries, we have very imperfect data, you know, and so we are forced to come up with reasonable hypotheses, reasonable predictions to test how, you know, the impact of different scenarios on the prioritization. Absolutely, we don't do this blindly, and to make all of our assumptions very public so that people can scrutinize and tell us, no, that's a ridiculous assumption you've made there, or that looks really quite reasonable. And again, you know, it's really important, I think, to see the whole prioritization process itself as part of the engagement. You know, in engaging with stakeholders, in setting priorities, you are not just setting the priorities, you are establishing links, you're establishing collaboration, communication. And so the process itself is not as important as the output, I think, but a very important part in terms of what the overall exercise achieves.
Thank you very much, Dr. Henson. We've come to the end of an excellent webinar. We commenced by setting the global scene. We did in-depth analysis focusing on SPS in the Caribbean region. And we ended with solutions for the Caribbean, hearing from our private sector partners and getting that socioeconomic aspect. Let me thank all of our very excellent presenters for all of the work that they're doing, for sharing all of that work with us here at Caribbean Week of Agriculture for the first time in a virtual forum, but I think we went very well. To all of the participants who joined us, thank you for your comments in the auditorium, and thank you for listening and sharing. We want to reassure everyone that you will receive the presentations from this webinar, and please keep close to, at the national level, to your ministries of agriculture, to all of your policy and public sector persons who are involved in setting that SPS framework and infrastructure, and to your private sector who are producing the food for our food systems. This has been SPS in a changing world. Thank you, everyone. Have a good day, stay safe, and stay well. Thank you very much.
Thank you and goodbye, everybody.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Thank you all. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much.
Bye, thanks.
Thank you.
Hey, bye everybody.
Okay,
Bye-bye. Thank you
bye-bye.
so very much, Mr. Sanka.
Most welcome anytime.
Bye.
We'll hold you to that.
We're already have him tied in.
That's okay with me. I like to share.
Good, wonderful, wonderful.
Bye,
Thanks,
everybody.
everybody. This was really, really
Bye.
lovely. Yeah.
Yes,
That's a good
Thank you,
information.
Mr. Arnold.
Very informative.
Hi, everyone. Thank you too.
Mhm. PMU